Recently, the company Powersports Nation sent me two incredibly rare three-wheelers from the 80s. They're Yamaha TRIKES 250s, which were only made for 2 years, and these two have been sitting for over 10 years. I decided to take the two machines and make one good machine out of the pair. The one looked like it was in good shape, so we tried to start it, but it wouldn't start. So we tore it down and it was in much worse shape than we thought. Sourcing all the parts for this rare machine has proven to be quite a challenge, but we finally got all the pieces for the engine and it's time to get building. Make sure to stay tuned to the end of the video for before and after shots to see the crazy transformation of this engine. All right, let's get into it. We've got an entire 1985 Tri-Z engine laying out on the bench. I think we have every single piece here. I'm not sure. We're gonna find out in a few moments here as soon as we start assembling this thing. Like normal, I'm sure we'll find something along the way that we're missing, but with hopes, hopefully not. This frame is pretty much where it was last week. A few minor changes. I added the seat latch right here. I didn't really show this before, but I got this. It's a plasti dip. It's a rubberized coating made just for this, and they had it in yellow. It matches really, really nice. It is zinc coated. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that is completely refinished. That is the original stuff from 1985. Back here, more pre-work stuff is done. I'm trying to keep this corner is like, it's like organized chaos, man. Trying to keep it as nice as I can, but we're just running out of space as normal. But we got our gas tank in here. This is actually really cool. It's the little things, man, I'm telling you, that I think just makes something set apart. So here's the gas tank, and hang on one second. Here is one of the other gas tanks, because we got 3 gas tanks with this project, and pretty much all of them were in similar conditions. So this is a good before and after kind of representation, because really, this one pretty much looked just like this. But you can see it had all kinds of like crud and stuff on it. And then they have a really cool gas cap. It's like a built-in one. You squeeze this, it's kind of difficult here. Squeeze that and it springs open. But you can see like it's all grody in here, all the little springs and whatnot. There's little pins and clips and stuff in there. I pulled all that stuff apart and had everything refinished. I refinished the gas cap, I coated this and then recoated the white for premix only. These springs I sent to Moto Blast. They are all re-zinc coated. The little clip here is vapor blasted by Moto Blast. And then I just refurbished the entire tank. We got this little screw here, zinc coated. No, I couldn't get the bushings, believe it or not. They were not available any longer. So I just found the best ones from the 3 tanks and put the better ones on here, put a little bit of rubber rejuvenator on them just to keep them all nice. Clean the tank out and all, and I've actually got a paper towel in there. You can see it, just kind of drying out the insides. But little stuff like that. It's like going the extra mile in all the little details, and I think that's gonna make this bike really special. And we've got our shock, our swing arm. We saw all that stuff in the last episode. The radiators are right here. If you guys follow me on Instagram, I did post these up. These took forever. These are the original radiators from 1985, the ones that came off of the Tri-Z. The damn compressor. I think we can get away with it this time though. These little fins though, they were not all straight, and going through and straightening both sides of both of these, it literally took, between straightening the fins, cleaning these off, and then recoating them, it literally took an entire day of work just to do that when a set of GPI radiators brand new are like $70. Is it worth it? I don't know, but I really do like using the OEM stuff, and I think that OEM black looks really nice. The GPIs are like polished, which looks cool, but it kind of takes away from like the stealth look. I think the black radiators on this yellow frame and everything are gonna look really good. Now there's some other pre-work that I did off camera, like this fuel pump. This is all recoated by Moto Blast, vapor blasted by Moto Blast, and then I rebuilt the pump with a brand new Mikuni OEM kit. So hopefully this works really well. Apparently this is like one of the faulty points of the Tri-Z. We'll find out, but aside from pre-work, what I wanna do today is get this engine built. As you can see, I've got all the parts laid out here. I've already surfaced the cases. I've got the bearings in there. I do wanna do a couple of the seals with you guys. Let's get started. So I've got the OEM service manual here, and man, it's pretty skimpy, dude. If you look at this thing, it's pretty skinny, and it's not as inclusive as I would like. Some of the directions are very vague. I already read through it. Some of them, you know, if I didn't have engine experience, I'd kind of be scratching my head, but that's the purpose of my full build engine videos. So there will be a full engine build video on this. This video is just gonna be kind of like a series video. So there'll be some details and, you know, going through it if we have any surprises or anything. And you know, stuff like that. But the full detailed engine videos are really long, and that's not really for everybody. So if you're watching this video and you're like, oh, wait a sec, Mike, like you didn't show this, or you skipped this, it's not gonna run right. I'm not showing all the details in this video, but we will get to see the finished result, like the completely built engine. This is probably the most rare engine that I've ever built, and the amount of information that's available on it is the least amount that I've come across yet. So I had to do a ton of research outside of the service manual, doing research on Google and searching forums and looking at a lot of pictures to see it the way things go, because some of the schematics are a little dicey. I think this is a 1985 and a half. So they had a 1985, and then they kind of changed some stuff up in 1985 and a half, from what I understand, and then they had the 1986. Those are the only years that they made this thing, and I think there's a couple little differences here and there. But again, with the service manual, the little schematics are almost like drawings. You can't even tell like what's going on with there, so pictures helped out a lot. So I've got all my bearings in place. Most of the seals are in there, but there are 3 seals that I want to do with you guys. Then once we get those in place, we'll put our crankshaft and our transmission in. So these are the crank seals, and installing these, the service manual is pretty vague, so I wanted to show you which way these go. They say to put the writing on the outside. So you can see on the seal, they're actually the dimensions right there. All of the writing is on the outside. There's nothing on the inside. So we're going to put it with the lettering on the outside. Same thing with this one. Lettering on the outside, there's a little key right there. And on the inside, there's nothing. So the one with the larger inner diameter is going to go on your clutch side. There's a collar that goes in here. Pretty typical of most engines. So we'll put this in place. Sometimes these press right into place. Before I do that, I'm going to take a little bit of high temperature bearing grease, wheel grease, and I like to coat the outside of the seal. This just kind of helps it go in a little bit easier, and also it keeps it from getting seized in there, because sometimes these damn things, they don't want to come out. A lot of times you can just press these in by hand. You want to pop around the other side. It can be difficult doing this stuff with the camera in my face. You want to try to get these to go in evenly, but that doesn't always happen. If you can't get it in by hand, you can use something like this. This is actually for my steel bender, but a socket will work just as well. And then we've got a dead blow. The big thing is you don't want to tap on the inside of the seal. So you're just kind of tapping around the outside. And the goal is to get it to go in evenly. Right, like that looks good, nice and flush and even. And while we're here, we'll put a little bit of grease in our inner lip so that we don't forget for later on. So this will be the seal with the smaller inner diameter. And if your seals look different than these, sometimes, depending on what brand you have, they may have different markings. So just be aware of that. This one's going to need a little encouragement too. You don't really want to rush any of this stuff, because if you ruin a seal, you're going to be stuck ordering a new one. Now, I don't know if you guys can see, but this seal is not going in even. This one side, no matter how I tap this, is going in lower. So I want to bring that back up. You want these bearing or seals to be flush. Now, a seal puller will probably damage that, so I'm going to go in here. It can be kind of tough with this whole housing around here. Key is to be really careful. So I've got, again, a nice wide flathead. This is the side that's just a little bit low, like a millimeter practically. So we're going to go in here. You want to make sure that you don't damage that inner lip. We want to get beyond that, and we're just gently feeling for the outside lip. Get that screwdriver under there, and we're just going to twist it a little bit. Very gently. Oh, you see? Lifted it up. Right like that. And now we're good and flush. By the way, guys, bossbearing.com says, warning, improper installation could cause severe injury or death. Do not attempt installation unless qualified to do so. All right, bearings, seals, and retainers are installed. We're going to switch case halves here, and we're going to go to our stator side so we can install the crank. So we've got a brand new pre-owned crank here. This is the crankshaft that came out of this 1985 engine. It did have play in the rod. It needed a rebuild, so I sent this to Power Sports Nation. And while they don't specialize in three-wheelers and sport ATVs, They can rebuild cranks. It's trued, balanced. It's got a brand new bearing in there. Brand new rod, says it right on there, man. Made in Japan, so you know it's good. But they do offer that service as well as full engine rebuilds. They do excellent work over there so that I don't have to do that crap. Putting these in can be kind of like a daunting task at first glance, but they're really not hard to put in. But you do need a crankcase installer tool. I've got one right here. It's available from Tusk. You can get these at RockyMountainATV.com. I will have this linked in the description below, as well as all the tools in this video. As long as they're available, I will have them linked there. Before we put that in, it's a good time to hop around the other side and make sure that you put some grease inside your crank seals. So we're gonna take this, pop it on through our engine case. Hopefully we can get it started, yep, a little bit. And then one of the things that you wanna focus on when you're doing this is that your rod is facing upward like this, where your cylinder goes. If you do this down here like so, as you pull it in, it's actually gonna get stuck. And I've done that before. We definitely don't wanna do that today. So make sure that that's up like that. Now attaching this tool is really easy. Basically, we're gonna fit an adapter on the end of our crankshaft. The Tusk one comes with a couple different sizes, so no matter what crank you have, most of them are gonna work, as long as it's a Japanese bike. So we have the correct adapter here, and we've got this little sleeve. We're gonna take the sleeve, put it with the threaded portion facing outward, slide it over our crank. We've got our adapter here with the side on the top that looks like a nut is going to face towards you. That is going to thread on to the end of our crank. You want to get it good and threaded on there because this is actually the anchor that we're going to be pulling on. So if you don't have enough threads, you could actually rip them off, or you could, you know, gall your threads or something. So you want to make sure that that's on there pretty far. And then when this sleeve comes up, you see now this won't come off. So now we're gonna take this threaded shaft, and this will thread onto our adapter. Just make sure that's threaded all the way in. And effectively, we've attached that to the end of the crank. Now we've got our tube here, and you'll see inside there's a key, this little groove here. We're gonna line that up with this little peg right here. Slide this over top, line that up. There we go. And we've got a nut that's going to go on the end. Just get that started. Now we've got these two crossbars. We're going to get these in place. Let's just get this started first. You want to kind of line these up someplace that looks at least mildly strong. Like if there's a really thin area, or like right here where your stator grommet goes, you don't want to put it there. And try to make them even. Get one side. Oop, this can be kind of cumbersome. All right, so we're set up. I like to put this kind of on the edge of the bench because we're going to be putting a wrench on the end here, and this way I can do full revolutions of the wrench. So we'll throw this on here. We'll get a little bit of tension on here. And it's going to start pulling the crank in. Again, you want to take your rod, make sure it's facing upward. And as I'm tightening this down, you'll notice this gap is going to get smaller and smaller. And sometimes they're tough. This one feels like it's going to go in nice and easy. If it's like cracking and creaking, that's normal. If it's really tough though, slow down. You might want to take it out. You might have a problem or something. You do not want to force it. You can see how easily this is going in. If these rods are bending, that's going to be probably a no-no. Stop. Check everything, make sure this crank is not coming in crooked. You want it to come in nice and straight. You might hear it creak a little bit. Kind of hoping it does, as an example. It's creaking a little bit, but not very loud. Sometimes they really creak and pop, and that's normal because these are very tight tolerances. We're almost there. This was a really easy one. And right about there. It doesn't have to be super tight. Yep, that should be good there. Then we're going to back this off. And we should be good to go. We can take our tool off here. Boom, installed. Now we're about to drop the transmission in place to set up for that. I've got two 2x6s. We're gonna get these in place and put them on either side. And that will get the engine off the bench. The reason we're doing that is because when we drop the transmission through, the countershaft is going to come through this hole and it'll be hitting up against the bench. So this will keep it up in the air. Now, if you've got an engine stand or something like that, that's going to make it a lot easier, but I understand that not everybody has tools like that, so no fancy tools here, just two 2x6s. This can be kind of hard to show. I'm going to come around from the other side so that hopefully you guys can see. So we're going to mesh these together. We've got this is the output shaft right here. countershaft. What the f? So we're gonna mesh these together, kind of roll them and get them locked in place and put them in both at the same time. Can be a little tough. Come on, you bastard. There we go. You just want to make sure that's bottomed out and make sure everything rolls good and smooth. Now we've got 3 shift forks to put in place, and then we're just going to fish this in here, and it'll fit right in the groove like so. Just kind of push it out to the side like that. Now the one with the 3 on it's going to go in. That's going to go a little bit higher up, right like so. This will go in like so. And just like with the other ones, just push it out to the side. Now we've got our shift cam right here. It does have a bearing on it, so just make sure that it rolls nice and smooth. You can go ahead and put some lubricant in all of our channels here. Now when we install this, we're going to do it with the shift star facing upward, and it's kind of cumbersome. Basically, we're going to take these little pins and navigate them into the grooves on the shift cam. There's no instructions denoted in the manual. It just says install the shift cam. So I'm just going to place this in here. We're going to have to spin it around and stuff. I tried just dropping it in, and it doesn't want to fit. So I think we're just going to have to play around with it a little bit. We might have to lift up the shaft just a little bit to get it to work. But once we get everything in there, I'll show you what it looks like in the correct orientation. There we go. So that bottom fork is really difficult to get in there. I actually had to raise the transmission a little bit just by pushing up on the countershaft. I don't know if it's supposed to be that hard or not, but it does go in. We've got 2 shift shafts. The short one is going to go on this side. The long one is going to go on this side. Now I've got lubricant on these shafts. I'm just going to slide these through, and they'll pop into a little groove in the case. There's that one. There's that one. So if you guys can see, those pins are fit into these grooves. There's the top one, goes in the top groove. And I don't know if you'll be able to see down there, but there is the pin down there, goes into the 3rd groove at the bottom. And then if we come around this side, you can see this pin right here goes in the middle groove. Again, this is a crucial time to make sure the transmission rolls freely. And then if you shift the shift drum, you'll be able to see the shift forks moving up and down, and that's actually shifting the gears. So you just want to make sure that all that stuff is working and moving nice and freely. Now we're about ready to put our case halves together. You want to make sure that you're prepared before you start putting your sealant on the case, because as soon as you start putting that down, it's going to start curing, so you have a limited amount of time. We're going to do both halves, and the way that I like to do this is you just kind of spread it around on all of the mating areas, and then you kind of dab it. And that gives it a little bit of a texture and a little bit of body. And it also makes the spread a little bit more even. And I typically don't have leaks, almost ever. So this has proven to be a pretty good method. Now we're going to put our dowel pins in. So we're going to pop them right in here. I'll do that one, and then come over on this side. I'll pop one in. Now we'll drop our other case half on. And just for reference, it's probably been about 10 or 12 minutes since I opened up the sealant. So we're going to drop this in place. Just make sure that everything's lining up. You want to go nice and slow. Don't force anything. Looks like, I don't know if we're hung up on something. Just want to go easy with it. We can tap on this one side with a mallet, just gently. I think it's just a little bit tight on this crank. You don't want to go hard though, because you can throw your crank out of true. All right, no problem. I think we're gonna have to pull this case together, just like we pulled the crankcase through, or the crankshaft through the other side. Sometimes you have to do that on this side as well. Shit. Okay. Shit. Think. All right, my crank tool does not fit the other side of that crank, so I've got to think on the fly here. I've got an idea though, but we got to go fast. What the fuck, man? Are all these bits fucking dull? Only when you need the shit. All right, just in the nick of time here. I've got this edger blade. There's just enough thread sticking through there that I think we can start this, and we should be able to pull it through. Yep, it's pulling it down, no problem. Sometimes you just got to be unconventional, man. This is working perfectly. Thinking on the fly, man. Make sure everything else is going nice and smooth. Yes, it is. And it's spinning nice and easy too, which is good. So we'll bring it down. What is holding this up? Everything rolls smooth. What the fuck? At about a 1/2 millimeter. Why? Well, luck would have it that my camera died during this ordeal. What I ended up doing was splitting the cases again, and it turned out that one of the bearings of the transmission wasn't set all the way in place. So I tapped that one bearing the rest of the way home, and then the cases went together no problem. Just in the nick of time. It took about 40 minutes, but I think the sealant was just tacky enough that we won't have any leaks. Pain in my ass. That's freaking hectic, man. What's funny is if you watch this video, you'll see all the struggles, but if you watch the engine building tutorial, it'll go together nice and smoothly. Now that we've got this all torqued down, we want to make sure that everything rolls nice and smooth. Crank feels good. Sometimes your crank might be a little bit tight. If it's just a little bit tight, the new crank seals can be really tight. This one rolls really nice and smooth, but that's just something to be aware of. If it feels a little bit like a little bit of friction, as long as it's smooth, it's probably okay. We'll check our transmission. Oh yeah, nice and smooth, man. You guys can see. That's good to go, man. Now the extra sealant that oozed between the cases, I like to clean that off. I used to take a rag with lacquer thinner and wipe it away right away, and it would smear and get all over the place, and it would take forever to clean off. So the best way to do it is to let it dry, and then you scratch away with your fingernail. It practically just peels away. Makes it way easier. So it's actually pretty late, so I'm gonna call it a night. We'll let this cure overnight, and we'll do it in the morning. But for now, the cases are complete. All right, guys, it's the next day, and our sealant is good and dry. The best tool for this is the good old fingernail. We're just gonna come in here. You can see this stuff just scratches right away. Sometimes when it gets peeling up, you can even grab onto it, and it'll just peel right off. Not all the time, but it's really, really easy to do this way. So I'm just gonna go around the cases and get to scratching. All right, let's get started on the clutch side of the engine. We're going to start with our shift mechanism. We've got a shift detent here, a return spring, and then a small bolt. And it's a special bolt. You'll see there's a little raised portion here. It's like a little collar. That is going to go on the inside of your detent, like that. And you want to make sure the flat portion of your detent is in this orientation. Just slowly walking this in. I don't see a torque spec for this in the service manual. It's an 8mm bolt. I'm gonna go to 7 foot-pounds. Good to go. Now I'm gonna put the shift shaft in place. It's a good time to inspect this, make sure it's good and straight. If this is bent, you're gonna have hard shifting. You also wanna inspect your splines. So you can take a good look at these. I actually missed on this one. You may not be able to tell on camera because these aren't that bad, but this one should really be replaced. There's a couple flat splines. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that.
I think they'll be okay. There's still a good bit of bite on them. If I wasn't trying to finish this video, I would order a new one. This is still available. They're only 35 bucks from Rocky Mountain ATV. Definitely worth replacing, but it's not that hard to replace. So I'm going to finish out the video with this one, and I think it'll be okay. I can always swap this out, but definitely, if you can inspect that beforehand, and even if there's just a little bit of wear, it's worth replacing these. So we're going to take a little bit of assembly lube, throw it on the shaft here before we throw it in. And don't forget, on the other side of the engine, there is an oil seal. It's always good to replace that, because you don't want, this is like a common spot on the other side that you get oil leaks. Ain't nobody got time for that. Just gonna get this to pop in. There we go. And now that's set in place. Before we go any further, I'm gonna put the shifter on the other side, and we're gonna test the transmission function. Okay, so now I can manipulate the shift changer from the other side. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna run it through the gears. How we're gonna do that, you wanna be spinning either your main shaft here or on the other side, your counter shaft. Sometimes you have to spin one or the other, and it can be difficult. Sometimes it feels like the transmission doesn't want to shift. That's totally normal when it's on the bench. Once the engine's running and it's at full RPM and stuff, it'll shift just fine. The big thing is just making sure that it actually engages into the gears and you don't have anything getting hung up or it just won't go into a gear. So make sure our shift changer is all the way in there. And what we're gonna do right now, we're in neutral. So to test neutral, you've got your main shaft and your output shaft. You should be able to spin one of these and hold the other one. And that's how you know that neutral is working. If this one's fighting you, something's not right, it's not going into neutral, but our neutral is good. So now we'll check first gear. So I'm just gonna spin our transmission and shift down. Okay, so now we're in first gear, and I'll show you. See, as I spin the output shaft, the main shaft is spinning, and if I hold this one, I can't spin it. So we know we're not neutral. First gear is working good. And now I'm just gonna go and shift up. We're gonna go, that should be second gear. Clicked right into place. Third gear. Oh, did it pop back a second? I think we're in third. Fourth, fifth, and now it won't go up anymore. So all of our transmission gears are good. You definitely want to test this now. So this is kind of interesting. I'm installing the idler gear, and if you look in the service manual, you can see it says, install the Kickstarter idle gear, and they've got it going onto the main shaft. So that would be this shaft right here. And obviously, that's not gonna work. This is the correct one right here. But it's just interesting. You know, usually in the I've seen this before where there's mistakes in the service manuals, but usually the Yamaha service manuals, I mean, this is a Yamaha service manual. Usually those ones are correct, but it's just interesting. Anyways, we have two washers. These little skinny washers, we'll put one in place. Put a little bit of assembly lube on our shaft. We've got the gear goes in place. And we've got another skinny washer. It's just like the one in the back. Put that in place. And then there is a C-clip. Usually the manual will recommend putting a new C-clip on. They're really cheap. It's good insurance. I recommend that also. Have I reused them? Yes. In fact, I'm reusing this one right here. As long as they're not like warped and they still have a good bit of spring, you're probably okay. It's just a good rule of thumb to replace these. I forgot to order one and I don't feel like waiting. So you just want to make sure that that snaps in though. I don't know if you heard that guy. They kind of clipped into the little groove. That's the main thing. And like I said, if you're going to reuse one of these, just make sure it's got good spring tension and like it's not wiggling around or anything once it's on there. That one should be good to go. Now we'll move on to our primary drive gear. That's going to go up front here. First, we have a collar that goes in place. You can see there is a thinner portion that will face outward. And you want to make sure, double check that you greased the inner lip of your crank seal. Put a little bit of lubricant on here. You got to be careful putting these in place because it's really easy to roll the inner lip of this seal. So usually when I'm doing these, I'll kind of spin as I'm going in and just keep an eye on the seal. You want to check that the lip doesn't roll. And I think we're good on this one. It's easy to tell. You can see the edge of the lip, if it rolled or not. All right, I think that's all the way in there. Now we've got the gear itself. Just line those teeth up. Pops into place. And we've got a lock nut that goes on top here. The manual does not call for Loctite on here, but I do not want this backing off. And this is a lock nut, yes, but it never hurts to just put a little bit of red Loctite, just a little bit, This red Loctite from Amazon, it's pretty good because it's not as strong as the name brands, but it's stronger than like a blue Loctite. So it's a nice in-between. I like to use that stuff. I'm just gonna spin this in place. You can feel the lock nut getting tight right there where it doesn't want to spin by hand. I'm gonna leave that there for now because we're gonna come back and tighten that later. Now we'll put our kicker gear in place. Something to keep in mind, this little tang on the back of your gear, it does spin. So if you're not getting it lined up right, just keep that in mind. You can move that to where it needs to go. Now that tang will be going in this little compartment right here. It gets captured in there, and then you can see this stopping portion, this flat portion here, that is where this stopper will be going up against. So we're gonna spin this around, and I'm actually gonna take my gear and my washer off here, just so they don't fall off. And we're gonna orient this so that that tang goes in that groove. Now I'm gonna put the gear in place, our washer, and then we'll take the spring, pair of needle nose pliers, and we'll just spin this around and put it in that hole right there, and that is where it will stay. Now typically I would hook up the Kickstarter and just do a test function, make sure this is working. Unfortunately, we can't do that on the Tri-Z because there's actually a second gear that's gonna go out here and it reverses the direction of the kick so that we can kick forward. Now because of that, there's no splines on it, so we can't hook up the Kickstarter. That's okay though. I'm gonna take my clutch removal tool, and this will hold the gears, and we'll be able to give it a test kick this way. You can see that gear comes out and then engages with the idler gear, and then that will turn the clutch basket, and then that will turn the crankshaft over. So it's functioning properly.
I wanted to stop to take a minute to thank you for making it this far into the video. I also wanted to stop to thank the companies and sponsors that are helping to make this project possible. Both of these Tri-Zs came from Power Sports Nation. Power Sports Nation is the largest parts provider for ATVs and UTVs in the country. If you guys follow the channel, you've probably seen me name drop them quite a few times. Now, if you are looking for parts, I encourage you to go to the Power Sports Nation website. While they did provide the parts for this project, what they specialize in is utility ATVs and side-by-side parts. The search engine on their website works great, and it's consistently updated with the new machines and parts that they get into inventory. I'd also like to thank Bonehead Performance Coatings, BBC TRIKES, Rocket Ron Racing, Rocky Mountain ATV, Moto Blast, Hermosi, and Wicked Metal Designs. These are all companies I trust, and most of them I use on a regular basis. Links and promo codes will be listed in the description below. If you're enjoying the video so far and looking for a way to help out, giving the video a thumbs up, leaving a comment below, or subscribing to the channel all help out a ton. Products and tools in the video are listed in the description below, and purchasing from those links does help me out a lot. I get a small kickback from that, and there's no extra cost to you. And if you're looking to support the channel even further, there is the option to join. All channel members get guaranteed responses to their YouTube comments. All right, guys, I am done talking. Let's get back to the video.
All right, now we're gonna go ahead and put our clutch basket in place. Chances are your basket will not look like this. This is an aftermarket billet basket by Talon. I will have this linked in the description below. It's pretty pricey. It's like 500 bucks, but they're the only option as far as replacements, at least from what I could find. We'll go ahead, and we've got a nice thick washer that's gonna go in place here on your main shaft. Now we'll put some lubricant. Then we've got a bushing that goes in place. Then we'll put a little bit more lube on the bushing. Then the basket goes in place. You may have to rotate this because you've got gears back here and they have to mesh together with the idler gear as well as your primary drive gear. There it goes, popped into place, no problem. We've got another thick washer. It's just like the one in the back. Can't mix them up. That goes in place right there. Then we've got the inner hub. This has to mesh up with the splines. There we go. Pop that into place. And we've got a locking washer right here. Now, I don't use these locking tabs. I use red Loctite. I've never had a problem with them backing off. They're a pain in the ass putting them on and taking them off. So this will go in place. I'm basically just putting it on here for the function of the washer. Otherwise, I wouldn't even run it. And then we're gonna use our red Loctite in here. You can put a fair amount on the clutch. Now this nut gets tightened down to 54 foot-pounds. As long as you've got one of these clutch holder tools, this job is a breeze. I highly recommend these things. They're like 15 bucks on your Rocky Mountain ATV, and I use them for a lot of stuff. Anyways, first thing we want to do is get this engine flat. It's just going to make it a little bit easier. Then we're going to come in here with our clutch tool, and it's going to grab onto this inner hub with these teeth. This does not need to be tight. It works like a vice grip, but we're not worried about gripping down this way. It's keeping it from spinning, so we just want to keep it nice and loose. That should be good right there. And then we're going to use the bench in our favor. So I've got the tool actually resting against the bench, and then we'll be turning on this nut. Now my nut is a little jimmied up, so I just want to make sure that the socket's all the way on there before we start wrenching on this thing. I think we're good now. Torque wrench is set to 54 foot-pounds. And now you barely have to do anything because we're up against the bench here. We're just going to go down. Again, making sure that we're gripping the torque wrench at the handle. There we go. It's 54 foot-pounds. Might have to wiggle this thing off. There we go. Take off our torque or clutch tool. Boom, no problem. Now we're going to tighten down the primary drive gear nut. The service manual doesn't give you any instructions at all. It literally just says to tighten the nut to 85 foot-pounds. So this will spin if we try to tighten it. There's a couple different methods. The method I want to use is where you hold the crank in position. You can see the crank can only go so far. Now, sometimes it goes right up against the case and you can put a bar across here. But this is bottom dead center and we've got a little bit of a gap. So we're going to make a tool for this and we're actually going to make it together. We're just going to take a 2x4. If you don't have the studs in place, it's a lot easier. But since we've got the studs in there, you can see this 2x4 fits in there perfectly. Basically, we're going to put the 2x4, we're going to cut a slot in this for the rod and we'll put the 2x4 in there. Then we'll be able to put a rod through this and the 2x4 will hold it up. This will be a pretty basic tool and I'll be able to reuse it. So we're just going to cut a slot for the rod to fit. Doesn't have to be perfect. I should be able to rip this right out. You want to make sure you have all the wood chips and stuff off of this so that it doesn't fall into your crank. Now just make sure the crank is on the correct downstroke so that when we're turning this way, the crank is in the front. Then we'll take our board. I had to open this up just a little bit more. I will take this, put it in place. I've got a shaft from a jack. That'll go right there. And now this crank can't turn. Now again, we're going to 85 foot-pounds here. That's a good bit of torque. So this is a time where if you have a buddy to hold the engine or if it's in the frame, it's going to be a lot easier because it can be a little cumbersome getting this much torque on a nut without the engine moving around. So I'm just going to use my body weight here and hopefully we can get the job done. All right, there we go. Not too bad. Now we'll just roll the crank back, remove the rod, take your board off, and we're good to go. Next thing we're gonna do is build a clutch pack. The cleanest way that I found to do it is with either a paper plate or a plastic plate like this one. And we'll take our fibers, put them in the plate, crack open our oil, and we will soak them right in the plate. You don't have to do this overnight. Some people say like, oh, you gotta do it for 24 hours and stuff like that. I don't really think that's the case. You know, we're not gonna be starting this engine up immediately. So putting the oil on the fibers and then putting it in the engine, it's gonna be, in our case, a few days before it starts up because we still have to put the engine in the machine and all. But there's gonna be some time for that oil to soak in is what I'm trying to say. So we're just gonna pour some oil on the plates. Doesn't have to be a crazy amount. And I'll just move these around, make sure that they're all good and lubricated. You can see, even just doing that little bit, they're kind of all over everything as it is. And the oil that I'm going to be using for this build is Maxima MTL Extra Light. It's a 75 weight. It's good for 2-stroke and 4-stroke. I have yet to use this, so I like to try different oils and see what I like best. Maxima is a really good name, so I don't think we'll have any problems. Now we'll start putting these in our basket. This usually wants to leak a little bit down the bottom, so just to keep things clean, put this paper towel down here. So we've got the fibers and we've got our steels right here. Now on the steels, you're gonna have a sharp edge and a rounded edge. Now, I don't really think it matters which way they go, but most people like to put them one way or the other. So I'm gonna go with the sharp edge facing out just to keep everything consistent. We're gonna start with a fiber. Just get all of the oil all over the fibers, and we'll fit that into our basket. Now before we move on, we're gonna come around to the other side of the engine and we're gonna put our clutch actuation arm in. So that's this arm right here. And also wanna make sure we have some assembly lube on our bearing in there. So we've got a washer that goes here, and then there's gonna be a spring on here. And the actuation arm will literally just drop in place. There we go. We wanna take our spring here We're going to pull it around to the other side so that the catch is up there. So it's got spring tension pulling it back. Now I've got the push rod. That's just going to go right in there. And then we've got a ball. Put some lubricant on that, and that's going to go on top. Now we can put the pressure plate in place, pop it in place, and it'll sit nice and flush up against your fiber. Now we'll put our clutch springs in place. These are brand new EBC clutch springs. They're 15% stiffer than stock. We're making a little bit more power with this engine than stock, so I felt that would help out with the clutching a little bit. Okay, now I'll go around and tighten these down. Again, we're going to 7 foot-pounds. Not very tight. Now one last thing, we have to adjust our clutch free play. It's an easy task to do. It can be kind of hard to show on camera, so I'm going to do my best here. So what we're going to be adjusting is the clutch actuation arm. Now where this engages is where it stops. So the little bit of spring right here is from this external spring, but when it actually engages, that push rod and the ball bearing that we put in is where it stops, and it's right here, which is way too far forward. According to the manual, they want this arm to line up with this little, there's a marker on the case. They want that to be right flush with that, so that's where it needs to stop, and you can see we're way out here. We're way off. Now adjusting that is really easy. If you guys remember that little threaded set screw on the front of our pressure plate, I'm going to come in here with a Phillips head. You want to make sure it's a JIS because you don't want to strip that out. Now I'm going to push this in to where it's maxed out, and now you'll see as I turn this, I'm turning the screwdriver, and you'll see the clutch arm is moving back. So we're just going to spin this in until it's right up against that marker on the case. Getting close. Right about there is where they want it, and then I like to go just a little bit beyond where they want it in the service manual, so right about there is where we'll go. And then once we're adjusted, we're going to tighten down our jam nut, so we'll hold that Phillips head and then thread in the 10mm nut. You want to do your best not to spin the set screw or you might lose your adjustment, but we're going to double check. And you want to make sure that this is pretty good and snug because you don't want this coming loose in the engine because then your clutch just won't work. I've had that happen before. All right, that's pretty tight. Once that's tight, we'll come around to the actuation arm again and just pull it into where it stops and just make sure that it's adjusted properly. This one looks like it's good to go. About ready to put our clutch cover on. I'm going to remove this paper towel and I'm going to roll the clutch assembly to the other side because all of the oil has probably worked its way towards the bottom of this clutch, and I'm just doing my best not to get any drips while we're putting the clutch cover on. Got 2 dowel pins to put in place, putting some anti-seize on them. Got one that goes up front and one that goes in the back. We've got a brand new gasket right here. I always recommend using a name brand gasket or an OEM gasket. Using cheap gaskets is just a pain in the ass, man. It just never works out. So we're going to go ahead and grease this, hang it on those dowel pins. There we go. Now we'll put our clutch cover in place. I did surface this thing and it was pretty bad. It was really out of whack, probably because it's a repaired case. But it surfaced and it is good and flat now. Just have to spin our water pump gear probably to get it to line up, mesh up with the gears inside. There we go. You want to make sure that case is seated flush before you start threading in any bolts, because it could be hanging up on a gear or something. Now I'll go around and thread all of our hardware in, and I'm going to run these all in by hand, kind of going in a crisscross pattern, and then I'll do the same thing with the torque wrench. And we're going to torque these down to 5.5 foot-pounds, and I'm going to go in a crisscross pattern. These do not need to be tight. We're almost there. We've got 2 little dowel pins to go for our water pump cover. I've got a little bit of anti-seize on there. And then we've got a gasket, same as our clutch cover gasket. I'm going to grease this up. We'll hang this on our dowel pins. Now we can pop our cover in place. The last piece of our clutch cover is going to be our second kicker gear. This is what's going to reverse the kick so that it can kick forward. Now, I do have some damage to my case here. This is where it was repaired. So typically putting this together, we would do the grease method. But because of that little bit of damage, I am going to put some Yamaha bond on here, just a little bit of RTV sealant, just so that we don't have any leaks as an extra measure. But if you don't have any damage here, I would just do the regular old grease method with the gasket. Here is the cover. I've got an oil seal on here. Just gonna put a little bit of grease in here. Then we'll pop our kicker shaft through. And then there's a thin washer that's gonna go on this side of the shaft. I'm gonna put a little bit of grease on there because I don't want the washer to fall off and fall into our engine when we're installing it. Put my Yamaha bond on here. And we've got 2 dowel pins, again, with some anti-seize on these. Pop them in place. Now I'm going to hang my gasket, and again, if we didn't have a damaged case, we would just be putting grease on this, and we wouldn't be doing any Yamaha bond. But, and I also probably wouldn't even run the gasket, but the gasket is pretty thick, and because we've got tight tolerances in here, sometimes they account for the thickness of the gasket in those tolerances. So I think it's smart that we run that. And I've also got Yamaha bond on our cover. Oh, what do you look at that? Looks like the gear is actually bigger than the gasket. So we're going to have to put the gear in first. Now we'll put the gasket in place. And then our cover. Throw our hardware in here. And then these I'm just running in to be a little bit snug, just so that the sealant barely starts to ooze, and then I'll let that sit for 15 minutes. That'll let the sealant get a little bit of body, just like with the center cases. Then I'll come back and I'll tighten these down to 5.5 foot-pounds of torque. And with luck, that should never leak. Good luck to the guy that has to take that off. Probably me. And last but not least, for the clutch side is the oil fill plug. Got a new gasket on there with a little bit of grease. Just snug that down by hand. And of course we got to throw the kicker on here. And just make sure that everything rolls over nice and smoothly still. Oh yeah. Nice and smooth. So our clutch side is done. Now we're going to move into the top end. This is my cylinder here. Your cylinder may look a little bit different. Mine is vapor blasted. So originally these cylinders are usually black. I've also got a brand new sleeve in here. We're going to be going to factory bore. If your ports look a little bit different than mine, that's because I did port this cylinder. But nevertheless, it's still going to install exactly the same as a completely stock one. And before we put the piston on here, we're going to stuff the crankcase just so that when we're putting that second clip in case it falls out, we don't want it falling into the crankcase because that would be a major pain in the ass. We put a new wrist pin bearing in here. You definitely want to put a new one of these in here if you're reusing components. This is one component you don't want to reuse. Get it good and lubricated. Then our piston's going to go in. This will go in with the little arrow on top of the piston facing forward. That goes towards the exhaust. If your piston doesn't have any indicators on it, these port windows go towards the intake, which is the back side of the cylinder. So we want to make sure that that's oriented correctly because people do put these in incorrectly and the engine can run in the incorrect orientation, but it will not run correctly. Slide this piston in place. You just got to get it to line up with the bearing and push the pin through. Okay. All right, now for the fun part. Get this other clip in place. These things can be a real pain in the ass. And just food for thought, it's a good idea to wear eye protection because these things are like little springs and they're under some tension. And I've had these things fly out and damn near hit me straight in the eye. So just something to think about. There we go, gotcha. And we're just gonna go around and make sure this is completely seated in its groove. That looks good. All right, now we can get this rag out of here. Our old dirty sock. We've got a fresh base gasket, just like with all the other gaskets. Going to coat this with grease. I'm gonna make sure you place this correctly. Get this over the gasket. It's okay if you get a little bit of grease on the gasket. or the piston rather. Slide this down over our dowel pins. That's in place. We're ready to drop the cylinder in place. Make sure that the piston rings are lined up properly with your little stays. We're gonna take whatever two-stroke oil of your choice and just get it all over the piston, the skirts and everything, sidewalls. Make sure it's good and lubricated. You don't want the engine to start up dry. The more the merrier. You can't use too much of this stuff. Well, I guess you could, but you know what I'm saying. And I'm gonna do the same thing with the inside of the cylinder. Just get it all over the cylinder walls. All right, now we'll come down here and we're gonna compress the piston rings with our fingers and then just slide the cylinder in place. Take your time. Sometimes it's not as easy as this. You gotta remember that this is what I do for a living, so just take your time, don't force anything. We're just lined up with our studs. There we go, nice and flat. We've got our cylinder base bolts, there's 4 of them. I like to put just a little bit of blue Loctite on these. Just a tiny little bit. Throw these in place. And I'm just gonna snug these down by hand first, and then we'll come in and tighten them down. If you want, you can wait until the engine is mounted in your frame. It makes it a little bit easier to tighten these because right now the engine's kind of moving all over the place. If you want to do it on the bench, we can do it the way that I'll do right now. I call it the swing arm bolt method. So basically, we're going to tighten these down to 25 foot-pounds, and we have a nice half-inch extension here. You put it through, actually, this one's not going to work. We have a nice 3/8 inch extension. Just slide it through where the swing arm bolt goes, and that's just going to give you leverage to keep the engine from twisting. So now, you can hop on here. We've got our torque wrench set to 25 foot-pounds. It looks like I need a deep well. Get our socket on there. And now you can hold on to the extension while tightening this. Makes it really, really easy. And you don't even need a buddy to hold the engine from spinning. And we're gonna go in a crisscross pattern. And again, making sure you're gripping at the end of your torque wrench. Good, cylinder's in place. Up in the front here, there's a little bit of excess gasket. Those 2 little portions that stick out. I'm just gonna come in with a razor and swipe those away. Careful not to cut yourself. Now that the cylinder's on there, we can do the satisfying engine turnover. Oh yeah. What the f***? You gotta be f***ing kidding me. Wow. Okay, tell you what, man, it never fails. There's always something. Look at this piston. As I was turning it over, if I can get this camera to focus here, it's sticking out like a 1/2 millimeter, which is not right. That is not good. And check this out. This is going to show you. Makes it even worse. Pop on our cylinder head. And I don't know if you guys can see, but it doesn't sit flush. If I turn this engine over, I'm about to crank this over and watch the cylinder head. See, it went down. It's actually, there's like 0 clearance between the piston and the squish band, so it would probably blow up. So I've got 2 base gaskets right here, or head gaskets rather, right here, and you know, these are pretty thick. If we put this on there, it'll probably just barely clear and the engine will be able to turn over. But we're looking for 0.75 millimeters of squish band clearance. So that means there needs to be a 0.75 millimeter gap between the top of our cylinder head, the squish band, and the top of our piston. And there's no way that we're gonna get that. Without the proper gap in there, we're gonna have catastrophic engine failure. And upon further inspection, if we go to bottom dead center, right about there. The piston top is supposed to line up with our port windows. It may be difficult for you guys to see, but it's sticking up about the same amount as it's sticking up over the head, like a 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter. So either the piston top needs to be shaved down or the cylinder needs to be raised up. You can really see it if you look in the exhaust port. You can see the edge of the piston sticking up. That's supposed to be flush with the bottom of the exhaust port. So my first thought is, what the hell's happening here? Why is this happening? So it's got to be one of three things. Either it's the wrong piston or it was machined incorrectly, so the piston top is too thick, making it stick out of the cylinder. The rod was either the wrong rod or it was machined incorrectly and it's a little bit too long, or the cylinder, something's wrong with the cylinder. Too much was shaved off of the bottom, maybe it was surfaced too much or something, and that's incorrect. The good news is there's multiple ways of fixing this. We can either take the head and have it machined to be a little bit deeper to make up for that piston coming through, but then our port windows would still be incorrect. Or what we can do is we could run a thicker gasket underneath or have a spacer plate made. So I did my research, and sure enough, there's a company that makes copper gaskets. They make copper or aluminum. They're basically like spacer plates. If you guys are into the 250R community, if you run a stroker on those, it's really common that guys will put a spacer plate underneath their cylinders. They'll do it with Banshees also. So it's not actually that uncommon. I don't know if that's a thing that people do with the TRIKES. Probably if you run a stroker, you kind of have to do that because it's such a rare machine. I don't think they make stroker cylinders. So it's no big deal. I already ordered 2 different gaskets so that we can adjust the height of the cylinder until we get it right. So it's not that big of a deal, and I can still finish out the engine tutorial video because this engine will still go together. And like I said, I think with that top gasket in place, the engine will turn over okay. And then it'll be funny, again, for those of you that watch this video, you get to see all the trials and tribulations, but if you go and watch the tutorial, it'll just go together nice and smoothly because I think this is like a one-off scenario. I don't think this is typical that this would happen with the TRIKES. It's possible even that when we tore this down, it was already like this because I never checked the squish before I tore it down. So it's possible that this issue was already there, and maybe that's why it blew up in the first place. Here's the old piston that came out, and you can see there's parts of the piston that make it look like it really didn't have that much time on it. So I'm thinking, except for, of course, where the catastrophic failure was, but I'm thinking that maybe this engine was never assembled correctly. It never had the right amount of squish the last time around, whoever built this thing, and maybe that's why it failed in the first place. We don't know, and we probably never will know, but one thing I do know is that the end of this machine's life seems like it was pretty rough, and one other thing I know is that we're gonna have to stop this video. What's going on, guys? It's Mike from the future here. I just got a package in the mail. I did not expect these copper gaskets to get here this quickly. We gotta open them up. Nothing like a good old surprise unboxing, right? Let's check these things out. I'm almost certain these are the copper gaskets. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Copper Gaskets Unlimited. This is actually awesome, dude. I cannot believe these things got here literally 2 days. And I mean, I called it nighttime. So it's like 1.5 days. Let me get these out of here. I'll show you what they look like. So essentially, we will be using these as spacers. But copper gaskets actually seal themselves. So these can be used as gaskets or as spacers, or as both. And I did my calculations. So you can see there's 2 different thicknesses here. I think the camera can probably pick that up. You can see one's a little thicker than the other one. I did my calculations about how much we needed to raise the cylinder. And I got 2 different sizes here so we can play with it a little bit. And I can either just use these as the gasket and spacer, or if I need a little bit more space, I can put a gasket on top of this and on the bottom of this. So we should be able to play with the height of that cylinder, and we'll be able to get our squish band just right. But man, just really, really cool that a company even offers these. I mean, this TRIKES stuff is so rare. I was ordering these things the other night, and when I saw that we had issues with the cylinder and we'd have to boost it up a little bit, I'm thinking this is gonna be a major setback, as in at least a couple weeks time. Finding the piece, I thought we would have to get these, I thought I was gonna have to measure like a gasket and send it out and have them custom made and stuff. But I found this company, it was like 9 o'clock at night, and I called him up. He's on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast, so he's 3 hours difference, but it was like 6 o'clock his time. It's still pretty late. He picked up the phone, and he was on the phone with me for like an hour. Guy's name is Lonnie, definitely passionate about vintage motorcycles and stuff, and he found this pattern. He had it in his computer. It wasn't listed on his website, and he said he could cut them in any thickness or whatever, and man, just a really cool guy. He was going into the hospital the very next day hopefully all that turned out well, Lonnie. And he still got these cut that very night and got them in the mail so that they came 2 days later. So really going the extra mile. It's a company I've never worked with before, but hopefully I can work with them again because just an awesome guy. So it is Copper Gaskets Unlimited. If you guys need copper gaskets really for anything, it seems like he makes it for just about anything. And I mean, talk about going the extra mile. He didn't even just use cardboard as the backing plate for these gaskets. This is like some kind of particle board that's really firm, just to ensure that these things don't get any creases or anything in transit. That's pretty awesome. So if you guys want to see the rest of this engine being built, you're gonna have to stay tuned for the full engine build tutorial. Now those usually come out after the series because at the end of those videos, I like to put some footage of the engine running in the machine. Plus, I don't like to put any tutorials out until I know that the build actually worked well because this is a tutorial. People are going to watch this stuff, and if I have wrong information here, they'll go and build their engines incorrectly. So I always like to double check my work and stuff. So the next Tri-Z video, unless something crazy happens and I want to show that in a video, it should be the finale video where we will be assembling the entire thing. Make sure to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and if you want to subscribe to the channel, see more videos like this, I appreciate that. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out. Are you kidding me? Did you really think I'd leave you hanging after getting this far into the video? Hell no. Here's a time lapse finishing up the engine so you get to see the finished product. But if you guys want to see all the details on this engine build, make sure to check out the full engine build tutorial. Until then, enjoy the time lapse and remember to subscribe so you don't miss the finale where we build this entire Tri-Z and take it ripping in the sand dunes. Peace out.